We are here on the cemetery site for St. Francis Xavier Parish, exploring the possibility of finding our 1662 chapel. The chapel was built as a result of the generosity of our original benefactors, William and Temperance Breton. They donated an acre and a half of land to the local Catholics for building a chapel and a graveyard. The parish community has continued in existence since 1662. In the early 18th century, the community moved down the road and built a new church, and that's the current St. Francis Xavier Church.
Well, Father Sanderfoot contacted me. I have a firm that does cemetery restoration work and archaeology, and Father wanted an inventory of his existing gravestones here in the cemetery. Father then mentioned that local legend says the 1662 chapel was here in the cemetery.
1662 being our original year of foundation, we had a 350th anniversary celebration last year. And leading up to that celebration, we wanted to begin to investigate where that chapel actually was. We know from the documentary evidence it was somewhere here in this vicinity.
William Breton owned a lot of land, and they knew that he had given this land, but how do you know where? And I think partly they've done it through oral history, because I think there were some Jesuits that were here in the early 1900s. They said they saw the ruined brick foundation of what they thought was the church. The cemetery is here, and usually a cemetery is located not too far from a church. So I think they zeroed in on this. The property's owned by the church.
We have the original deed, copy of it, describing this land with the signatures of William and Temperance Breton on it, the original witnesses. And so we thought, let's go to work, let's look for it.
And we explained to him that a phase 1 survey, which is shovel test pits every 50 feet, might reveal the existence. And when we got to this general area here, we started coming across 17th century material. And then we've kind of expanded our excavations from there, and there we are today.
It's been about 2.5 years since we started, and it's not been continuous. You know, we've done a long weekend here, a long weekend there. I think this is perhaps our 4th major outing.
And the local parishioners have been very active in actually coming out and getting their hands dirty. They're throwing dirt, they're standing at the screens picking artifacts. So that's really important too. This is the local community's history, and we're really glad that they're a part of it. Mostly what we found up in this area, which we're calling the chapel site, we found architectural material, window glass in abundance. So we know that this building had windows. An abundance of hand-wrought nails, which tells us it was wood. But interestingly, we have found locally made floor tiles, as opposed to pan tiles, which you'd find on the roof. These ones are flat. We don't know if it covered the entire floor. There's some indication in European chapels where the altar area would have been covered with tile. And perhaps that's the case here, and the rest of the building had a wooden floor. But we're finding all architectural stuff at this end and very little domestic stuff. And the lack of domestic artifacts would make sense in a chapel, because they're not preparing meals or eating food in the chapel, or at least they shouldn't be. So we're not finding the domestic stuff that you would expect in that area.
The domestic being ceramics, wine bottle glass, that sort of thing.
And the location here, a lot of the local lore said the chapel would be at the entrance to the cemetery, which a lot of people took to be out toward the road. Well, 350 years ago there was no road there, but this marshy area was certainly open enough that small boats could have come in. So the hypothesis is we have Breton Bay over here and St. Clement's Bay over there. They were arriving by water, so this would have been the entrance to the church. And that's another piece of supporting evidence, finding it here as opposed to up by the road.
We're at a part of the site, at the south edge, where there's a swale, sort of a long depression that leads downhill and into the marsh behind me. The marsh is recent formation. It's largely a result of sediment flowing into the creek from agriculture in the last couple of centuries. But this would have been navigable water. You'd be able to take good-sized boats up here from Breton Bay. People would come ashore probably at this point. We think this is the spot where folks are coming ashore to attend the church.
we use the equipment of construction workers. You can go to Lowe's and you can purchase the equipment, and we come out here, we use surveyors equipment to lay out our grids, perfect little squares that you see here.
What we've been trying to do, and what archaeologists in general try to do, is take the soil down in very thin layers, so that's why we're using trowels. We've actually shoveled off the surface soil where the features aren't real likely to be. A feature very basically is a disturbance of the soil. It's anywhere that past occupants of a region have dug down into the soil and disturbed it, and you can tell by changes in coloration where that's happened. So for example, down here where we have a grave shaft, they've dug down deeply into the subsoil where you get a lot of these orangey and yellowy clays, and then that's what they've refilled into the shaft. So it's much more colorful and mottled than the surrounding soil. In this case, we're troweling down very carefully because we're not exactly sure at what level we're going to find those features, and we want to remove the soil very carefully so that as we come down, we not only see the changes in soil coloration, but oftentimes you'll feel a change in the soil. So the clay is very thick and sticky and difficult to move your trowel through, and you kind of bounce through it. But then right next to it, where we have an area that's been disturbed, but it's a much more organic soil, it's much easier to bring your trowel through. It's a lot softer. So you can sometimes even feel that change in soil texture even before you see it. So when we know for sure we've got the outer limits of a feature and we've been able to define it, we'll take our trowel and draw a score line in the soil so that when we go to record the data, we have a very accurate representation of what we're seeing in the ground. Archaeology is destructive by its very nature. You're digging down into the features that you're looking at, so you can't go back and reproduce your results to test your hypotheses at a later date. So the way that we try to mitigate that is to make sure that we keep very, very accurate records of what we're seeing in the soil. We actually take chunks out of the soil and take a close look at the coloration so that we can go back later and say, well, this clay was a different color than this clay, so that indicates a different type of disturbance. And as I mentioned, we draw lines in the soil, score marks, to show exactly what the delineation of the feature is, so that when we come back later to do our paperwork, we can put rulers down and take very accurate measurements to show precisely where those features were appearing, because then you can take the entire site as a whole, especially a site like this that's been sampled into over several years, and put all the pieces of the puzzle together and get the bigger picture.
And what you're looking at here is basically a sieve. So after the material is dug up, every part of it goes into a sieve, and the sieve is 1/8 of an inch wire.
Shake it.
And everything is pushed through the sieve, and the objective is to catch anything that might lead to the history. So we're looking for any kind of materials that are man-made materials, materials that are natural materials that would explain what was going on.
And we want to do it in a standard manner. We don't want to just depend on people's, eyes seeing things, because everybody has a different sense of seeing.
Here we're finding lots of shells. We are finding little bits of floor tiles. We're finding, obviously, shards of stone materials that the Indians have used to start making points. We're finding old nails with rust all over them. And some window glass, little bits of window glass, pieces like that. So something like that, if we're not sure of what it is, it'll go in the bag. And then in the lab, when they wash it, they'll say, oh, why did someone collect that piece of rock? Or they'll say, look at that,
Kind
that's
of
a
like
piece
these.
of pottery.
It's got an interesting shape to it,
Yeah.
but it's just how the river pebbles grow.
But see now, like here's a little piece of that pottery, that red. Okay, come on, sharp eyes. If I can find it, you guys can
Here,
find
come on,
it
take a
twice
look.
as much. Get your hands dirty.
You got one?
Yeah,
Oh, there it is.
There you go. What'd you
Found a
find?
shell.
Oh, Michael found it.
You have to ask her what it is because she knows more than I do. Right?
A little bit.
What is
I
it?
found
Oh,
two
it's part.
pieces of shell.
All right, that's this
Are they,
is.
are they
I think
bigger
it's
than
part
a
of
quarter?
the tile.
That's part of a tile. See that with the red is a tile. And we want to find all we can of it because the quantity of what it is and where it was found helps the archaeologist put together the picture of what happened here.
Digging is such a small part of what we do. They'll spend, I think they're here for a week, 10 days. Then they'll take the material to a lab, they'll wash the artifacts, they'll take their field records. I don't know if you've seen any of the field records, but they're very detailed because archaeology is destructive. As we're digging the site, we are no different than a bulldozer that would destroy a site, but we record everything. We take maps, we take photographs, we make maps, we bring the artifacts, we wash them, we take the maps and we put them into computer programs, usually GIS. It helps us see relationships between those features that we were looking at earlier, and it also helps us to see what artifacts occur in what areas. So that when we say we think this is here, the 1662 chapel, we can not only say that, we can then make the argument and lay out that data for somebody else to evaluate our conclusions, our interpretations. If you want to know about the past, you go to the Maryland State Archives and you look at documents. Well, artifacts are documents too. These gravestones, this landscape, the material that you'll see at this site, all documents. They just require different skills for reading them and interpreting them.
We've been working here for 2.5 years. We finally got something. I mean, we've got structural remains all around us, the tile fragments, the nails, the glass. Here we finally can say, okay, the footprint of the chapel, it's actual where it actually sat, we can put that on the ground now. Unfortunately, we haven't exposed enough to be able to say exactly where the entire footprint is and how big the building was and how it was oriented. Yeah, what we have is a series of structural post holes. That is the hole that was dug to put the post into the ground to support the building. And then we have the structural post mold, which is all vacuity where the wooden post used to be. So the post has been removed or rotted away, and so the soil within it is a little bit different from the soil around it. And you can see from the lines we've drawn, these post holes intrude upon one another. So we've got a succession of wooden posts probably replacing one another.
Jim, talk about this one being filled in.
Yeah, this one's filled with oyster shell. Now, why it's filled with oyster shell is anybody's guess. But it looks like this is probably the original post, huh? Everything else intrudes on it. This is probably the original post that went here, and it decayed, presumably, and was cut loose, removed, and new post holes were dug into it to install replacement posts.
And it could be that the oyster and the rocks around it just happened to be laying around and were used to fill the hole in when the post was, the rotted post was removed.
Yeah, for instance, this one over here, you see this red here? I think that's tile. That's a piece of that floor tile that's in the mold. That broken floor tile presumably was somewhere on the surface when that wooden post was removed. There's actually a bit of Indian pottery in here too. You can barely see it a little bit. So this whole site was occupied by Indians long before Europeans got here. So when the Europeans started digging holes, whatever was on the surface wound up in those holes. Well, I mean, we've got a sequence here. We could say this was first, and then these one or the other came next, and then this came, and we could see the sequence. But without exposing more of this area and finding the full footprint of the chapel, it's really hard to interpret these things.
On a preliminary basis, which one would have been first?
I think this one is first, and then this one or this one. We can't tell which intruded first. I would bet this one because there's more organic matter in it. There's less in this. Suggesting the surface is more eroded when this one was dug. And then this one here intrudes into this one. And it also intruded into a little one there. There's very little of it left. You just barely make it out here.
Can we conclude anything from the architectural debris being in that mold? Would that have been after the chapel was salvaged?
No, well, I think the post was removed as part of the salvage. Because clearly salvaging the tile, the floor tile. We haven't found a single floor tile. They're probably, what, 8 inches on the side?
Sure. Nothing intact.
Nothing. We found maybe a third of a tile. It's the largest piece we found.
And no intact glass either.
All the glass is very fragmentary, and of the lead strips or cames that held the glass together in a window, you know, it's a diamond pattern like stained glass, we've got one piece of that out of all the excavation.
Would that have been typical at that period in history to salvage a building?
Salvaging the lead from the windows, yeah, salvaging whole windows would be better, of course. Tiles, we don't know. Floor tiles don't occur that often on these sites.
How about nails? Would those have been salvaged?
I think they were. I think they torched this thing.
In torching the nails will preserve them. A lot of the nails we're finding are rusty, but we have found some that appear pristine, almost new, and that's a result of the burning in a fire. A lot of times I've been told that you'll burn a building down specifically to salvage the nails and preserve them.
Yeah.
They took out what they could and then burned the rest?
Well, by burning the frame structure, it was a lot easier to recover the nails.
Because you're not pulling them out of the
Instead
boards.
of trying to pry them loose, you know, you just burn the wood around them and then pick up the nails afterwards. And iron would have been at a premium, and of course, you know, people made their own nails, so you'd have to get a piece of iron stock, go to a forge, cut it, and shape it, and there's a little bit of labor involved in that. So they are valuable.
Why is it important that we know where the 1662 chapel is? I think it's critically important because it tells us how these people who are here trying to figure out how to use this land, exactly how they're using it. They're here, not here. They're doing this here, they're doing that here. And archaeology gives us the tools to understand not just where they are, but also what they're doing there. There's a chapel here, there's a domestic site here, there's a capital city here. And when we take all of these things and put them together, using the written documents, joining them with the archaeological evidence, we can tell these really powerful stories about early Maryland history. So much more powerful than if we just had the records. Because with the records, the people that keep the records are usually very wealthy. They're keeping them about the very wealthy. The archaeological evidence doesn't discriminate. You know, whether you're poor, middling, wealthy, no matter what color you are, no matter your gender, you're going to leave something in the ground for the archaeologists to find. And so that helps pair with the documents and tell these far greater and far richer stories.